Anticosti Island is an island in the province of Quebec, Canada, at the outlet of the St. Lawrence River into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, between 49 degrees and 50 degrees north, and between 61 degrees 40 and 64 degrees 30 W. At 7,892.52 square kilometers in size, it is the 90th largest island in the world and 20th largest island in Canada. Anticosti Island is separated on the north from the Côte-Nord region of Quebec by the Jacques Cartier Strait, and on the south from the Gaspé Peninsula by the Honguedo Strait. Anticosti Island is larger than Prince Edward Island but sparsely populated, with most of the permanent population in the village of Port-Menier on the western tip of the island, consisting chiefly of the keepers of the lighthouses erected by the Canadian government. The entire island constitutes one municipality known as L'Île-d'Anticosti, due to more than 400 shipwrecks off its coasts. Anticosti Island is sometimes called the Cemetery of the Gulf. Geography. Anticosti Island is part of the eastern St. Lawrence lowlands. It is 217 kilometers long and has a maximum breadth of 48 kilometers, 1.5 times as large as the province of Prince Edward Island. Its coastline is 520 kilometers long, and is rocky and dangerous, offering little shelter for ships except in Gamish, Ellis, and Fox Bays. There are large shoals to the south. The largest lake on the island is Lake Wickenden, which feeds the Utica River. There are numerous rivers on Anticosti, many of which flow through deep gorges and canyons to the north and south shores. Topographically, Anticosti Island can be divided into three distinct regions: two lowland areas, rarely exceeding 150 meters in elevation, in the eastern and western thirds of the island linked along the coast, and a central highland forming a plateau that rises to just over 300 meters. This plateau is a unidirectional structure slightly tilted to the south, and is characterized by rolling cuestas. The rocks exposed on the island form a continuous sedimentary stratum more than 2,000 meters thick. These are the most complete strata in eastern North America of the Ordovician and Silurian periods. The climate of Anticosti Island is maritime subboreal, tempered by the maritime influence of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which reduces the temperature differences. The average annual temperature is 1.9 degrees Celsius. The month of July is the warmest with an average temperature of 14.79 degrees Celsius. Conversely, February is the coldest month, on average -11.2 degrees Celsius. Snow precipitation is abundant, usually accumulating over 300 centimeters in the western and central parts. History. For thousands of years, Anticosti Island was the territory of the indigenous peoples who lived on the mainland and used it as a hunting ground. The Innu called it Notaskuan, translated as where bears are hunted, and the Mi'kmaq called it Natigostek, meaning forward land. The French explorer Jacques Cartier sailed along its shore in the summer of 1534. He provided its first written description and named it Isle de l'Assomption, because he discovered it on the day of the Assumption of Mary. This name had fallen into disuse by 1656. About 1586, the historian André the Vet wrote that the savages named Natacosti, while Samuel de Champlain spelled it Antiscotti, Antiscoti, Inticosti and Anticosti. For that time on, France had officially incorporated the island into its colonial empire. Its first settlers arrived in 1680 when King Louis XIV gave Louis Joliet the seigneury of the Mingan Archipelago and Anticosti Island as compensation for exploring the Mississippi and Hudson Bay. Louis Joliet erected a fort on Anticosti and in the spring of 1681 settled there with his wife, 4 children and 6 servants. His fort was captured and occupied during the winter of 1690 by some of the Massachusetts troops of William Phipps during the retreat after an unsuccessful attempt to capture Quebec City. After Joliet's death in 1700, the island was divided among his 3 sons and the Joliet family retained ownership until 1763 when the island became part of British North America under the terms of the Treaty of Paris that ended the 7 Years' War. The same year, the island was annexed to Newfoundland until 1774 when it was returned to Lower Canada and annexed again to Newfoundland from 1809 to 1825. It became a part of Quebec at the Canadian Confederation in 1867. During these years the island property changed hands several times, its owners generally using it for the harvesting of timber, otherwise no real development took place. For example, the French-Canadian Gabriel Elzéliot Taschereau owned it among other seigneuries and made money from them. In 1874, it was bought by the Anticosti Island Company and they founded the villages at English Bay and Fox Bay. Most of the inhabitants, however, continued to be the few keepers of the island's many lighthouses. Because of the number of shipwrecks around the island, stores of provisions were also maintained around the island for sailors who might be washed ashore. In 1882, the parish of Notre-Dame de l'Assomption was founded, a term referring to Cartier's name for the island. In 1884, the island became property of the Stockwell brothers who formed a forestry company 2 years later, but they were unsuccessful and the company lasted only 5 years. By the 1890s, the fish and wildlife of the island had been almost eradicated through the locals' indiscriminate slaughter. In 1895, Anticosti was sold for $125,000 to French chocolate maker Henry Menier, who also leased the shore fishing rights. Menier named the island's 70 meters high Voreal Falls after the town of Voreal in France where he owned a home. He constructed the entire village of Port-Menier, built a cannery for packing fish and lobsters, and attempted to develop its resources of lumber, peat and minerals. Many of the original houses still stand today. Furthermore, he converted the island into a personal game preserve and introduced non-indigenous animals for this purpose, including a herd of 220 white-tailed deer. The deer thrived and today the population exceeds 160,000 while the island's moose population is about 1,000. It has been reported that black bears, which rely on berries to bulk on for the winter, had lived on the island until the introduction, but have disappeared perhaps because of the deer eating the berry bushes bare. Henry Menier died in 1913 and his brother Gaston became the owner of Anticosti Island. He used and maintained it for a time but eventually decided it was not an economically viable operation and sold it to the Wickenden Pulp and Paper Company in 1926 for $6 million. For the next 5 decades, the island was used almost exclusively by logging companies which invested nothing in environmental or heritage protection, while the villages at English Bay and Fox Bay were abandoned. Wickenden was successful until the Great Depression when the paper market collapsed. The island property was taken over by Consolidated Paper Corporation Limited in 1931, but they showed little interest in it and put it up for sale. Offers came from Canadian, American, British, French and Belgian parties. In July 1937, an offer was received from a consortium of Dutch and German capitalists who who intended to build a sulfide mill and wanted a steady supply of pulpwood and access to Canadian capital. In the autumn of that year, a team of German surveyors traveled to the island to examine its timber and export potential. When this story broke in the Montreal Gazette of the 2nd of December 1937, it caused an immediate controversy since the story claimed that the survey team was really made up of Adolf Hitler's agents and that most were naval, military and fortifications experts. Despite the substantial offer, the promise of thousands of new jobs, and the fact that there were no legal methods to block the sale, the suspicions remain. A committee was set up to investigate the affair but concluded that there was no evidence to indicate that the project has other than a commercial purpose. When the deadline to purchase the island passed on the 15th of September 1938, the offer expired and controversy died out. In 1974, the government of Quebec purchased the island from the forestry company Consolidated Bathurst Limited for $23,780,000. Anticosti was placed under management by the Ministry of Recreation, Hunting and Fishing, and in 1983 the process began to set up a working municipal structure. Today, about 60% is under management by SAPAC, and since April 2001, 572 square kilometers has been designated as a national conservation park. With its 24 rivers and streams bountiful with salmon and trout, the island is now a tourist destination for anglers and hunters, particularly from the United States and Canada, as well as for paleontologists, bird watchers and hikers. Municipality of L'Île-d'Anticosti. Access and transportation. Access to the island is either by boat or plane. From April to mid-January, the commercial shipping company Relay Nordic services Port-Menier twice weekly with a passenger and cargo vessel. The Port-Menier airport is serviced by Air Liaison, which provides regular scheduled flights to Septiles and Havre Street Pier. There are two other aerodromes on the island, both towards the eastern end. Rivière aux Ormonds is located on the northern side of the island and was paved in July 2010. Rivière Belle Gravelines is located on the southern side. These are used by outfitters and charter companies that provide private air services during the tourist season. The Henry Menier Road, a Trans-Anticosti road, the island's unpaved main road, stretches from Port-Menier to the eastern tip, with numerous forest roads branching off to provide access to various tourist locations and logging concessions. Car rental is available in Port-Menier. Flora. The forests of Anticosti Island are typical boreal forest, with common species such as white spruce, balsam fir, and black spruce. It is distinguished by some minor stands of American white birch and trembling aspen. Balsam fir is slowly being replaced with white spruce because of intensive grazing done by deer and by periodic outbreaks of hemlock looper and spruce budworm. About a quarter of the island is covered by peatlands. Anticosti Island is home to the rare lady's slipper orchid. While populations are declining elsewhere in eastern North America, the orchid flourishes here abundantly, making Anticosti a refuge for this plant. Fauna. The wildlife is characteristic of an isolated marine environment. Of the 24 mammal species, 14 of these are marine mammals that include gray seals and harbor seals. Even large whales ply the nearby cold waters of the Gulf. Originally, there were probably only 7 indigenous species of land mammals, namely the red fox, river otter, deer mouse, American marten, black bear and 2 bat species, but the marten and bear have now disappeared. black fox have been seen on the island. In order to make Anticosti Island a hunter's paradise, several animal species have been introduced since 1896, making the island an unprecedented biological experiment. In all, 16 new species have been introduced, but 6 proved to be unsuccessful, including bison, caribou, elk, mink and fisher. For 10 species it has been fruitful: 6 species of terrestrial mammals, 2 species of frogs, and 2 species of non-migratory birds. Of all these species introduced, the success of white-tailed deer is particularly noteworthy. From an initial group of about 200 introduced in 1896 and 1897, the population of white-tailed deer has grown to an estimated 160,000 animals today, representing a density of 20 deer per square kilometer. The brook trout, Atlantic salmon and American eel visit the shores and swim up several rivers of the island. Some 221 bird species distributed among 21 families have been observed on Anticosti Island. It is home to nearly 60% of the known breeding sites of the bald eagle in the province of Quebec. Tourism. Because of its untamed wilderness and abundant wildlife, Anticosti Island is known for its hunting, fishing and outdoor opportunities, and it attracts some 3,000 to 4,000 hunters per year. The majority of Anticosti Island is under management by SAPAC-Anticosti, a division of the Provincial Parks and Wildlife Reserves Agency SAPAC. It actively promotes tourism on the island, in particular hunting and fishing tours. Another 572 square kilometers is protected in the Anticosti National Park. In addition to hunting and fishing, many other outdoor recreational activities are supported in this park, such as hiking, horseback riding, nature viewing and sea kayaking. There are also 5 commercial outfitters that hold exclusive hunting and fishing rights to 7,263 square kilometers of the island. Utica Shale. The Utica Shale, a stratigraphical unit of middle Ordovician age that is potentially rich in shale gas reserves, underlies the Anticosti Islands and extends to surrounding areas in Quebec, Ontario and much of northeastern United States. In June 2011, the Quebec firm Petrolia claimed to have discovered about 30 billion barrels of oil on the island of Anticosti, which is the first time that significant reserves have been found in the province. In February 2014, PQ Premier Pauline Mouar announced that the provincial government would help finance 2 exploratory shale gas operations as a prelude to hydraulic fracturing on the island, with the province pledging $115 million to finance drilling for 2 separate joint ventures in exchange for rights of 50% of the licenses and 60% of any commercial profit. It was the first oil and gas deal of any size for the province. With the change in government that occurred in April 2014, the Liberals of Philippe Couillard could change that decision. Petrolia Inc., Corridor Resources and Moral and Amprom formed one joint venture, while Junex Inc. was still seeking a private partner. On June 4, 2013, the citizen group Non-Eau Petrolo Quebec released one of the biggest petitions in Quebec history, with 26,000 signatures against fracking, exploration and exploitation of oil and gas on Anticosti Island, asking for a moratorium and an environmental evaluation. Marc Durand doctoring in geology presented a conference explaining that a minimum of 12,000 wells would be necessary for this exploitation and would put Quebec in debt, considering the $12 million cost of one of these wells. A year later, when Pauline Mouar announced an investment of $115 million for Petrolia to continue the exploration, the same petition increased up to 36,000 signatures. The government has not started a BAPE specific for Anticosti.